Hello and welcome back once again to Solo Board Gaming Presents, and we're taking our second look at Wir sind das Volk. Brilliant game, political conflict from Per Sylvester and Richard C. Val from Histogame. Now, in the first video a couple of weeks ago, we went through a complete overview of the game, where we explained what the idea was, the battle between West Germany and East Germany, as was from 1945-49 up to the end of the DDR, in effect, when the Berlin Wall came down, 1989. So we've got 4 decades to play through within the game. But today we're going to do a play demo. We're going to play 1 decade just to show how the game works. We're going to play the first decade, which is 1949 to 1959. I have my 4 decks of cards set out over there, 1 for each decade, 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s. As you can see, so we're just going to play with that first deck. Deck number 1. Now, each deck has 21 cards in it, so that's 84 cards altogether when you're playing through the whole game. Why aren't we playing through the whole game? Well, apart from time, although I suppose we could do it in a series of videos, but also I didn't want to expose those that haven't yet taken the plunge with this game. I didn't want to expose those people to all of the cards, because there are some fabulous surprises in there. It covers all of the events of those 4 turbulent decades and the conflict between East and West. So the cards have many expected events in them, but also many surprising events and some great card art. Yes, I know each time you play it, it'll be completely different. They'll come out in a different order. One would use each card for completely different purposes, so every single game is totally different as you explore new strategies each time you play the game. But even so, let's just stick to decade number 1 and leave the 60s, 70s and 80s up to you guys. I'm going to lay my market cards out here. We will zoom further down into the map very, very shortly as we start to play the game. But first of all, the setup. If you remember from the first video, these little blue cubes, these are the unrest cubes. And every single area, every single province starts with 3 unrest cubes, even West Berlin and East Berlin. The 3 unrest cubes in Berlin, by the way, in West Berlin, cover West Berlin in general. They are not divided by the Allied sectors. So everywhere has 3 unrest cubes to start off with, except Baden-Württemberg, Rhineland-Pfalz and Nordrhein-Westfalen. These are the 3 sectors, look, that feed West Berlin during the game. You may see some of that during this first decade, I don't know. We'll see how we go. So these all have 2 unrest cubes, while the rest have 3. What else do we have placed on our map? We have, we have West and East. Each has its first 2 factories. And the first 2 in the East is in Berlin and Bitterfeld. They don't have any connections, so you can see they have the number 1 pointed to the top of the map. In the West, it's Hamburg and Dortmund have the number 1 pointed to the top of the map because there's no connections. The other thing we have on the map is our flight tracker here at the bottom, which will come into action at the end of the decade. We have our socialist cube, Sozialismus cube there in the socialist box, socialism box. We have our socialist tracker marker. We also have our Western currency marker and the very top track up there is the prestige marker. And then finally we have a marker, you can see there just to the left of the top of the end of decade reckoning track. And that's quite a complex thing. Still now, each time I do, and I've played, is it 5 games? Might even be 6. As I play through an end of decade reckoning, I still have to refer to the rule book. Okay, so I think that's it for the setup explanation, he said confidently. Yes, I think it is. So we'll start the game. So at the start of the first decade, we take our decade 1, 1945 to 1959 deck of cards. So in this deck there are 21 cards, but we play them in 2 half decades. So the first half of the decade we need 7 cards in the marketplace. Now the first thing I do is, and I always keep it on the bottom, is take out the DDR's decade card. Now that will stay at the top there, and we call it the decade card because there's one of these special cards for each decade, and only the DDR can play that card. That's quite an impressive looking card and quite powerful if we decide to use it. For the East to use that card, it must be used within this first decade. If it's not used within that first decade, then it's removed at the end of the decade. So that just sits there in case the East needs to use it. Now the rest of the deck have been shuffled and we're going to deal 7 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're now going to deal each player 2 cards to keep in their hand. 1, 2 for the West. 1, 2 for the East. And I'm just going to plonk those down. We'll deal with those in a special way, because if you're playing multiplayer, it's those 2 hand cards are the only pieces of hidden information in the whole game, which is why this game actually plays really well solo, because the only thing we have to allow for is that simple hand of 2 cards, and we'll cover that shortly. The rest, the other half decade, goes away for now. Okay, let's put the other 7 cards out then into the marketplace. Whoa, land reform, 1945 to 48. That's a red card. This one's a dual card. Look, it's red and it's yellow, so it can be played by either player. And that's Stalinist purges. Then we have NATO membership and rearmament. Also a red and yellow card. Then we have reparations agreements with Israel. These can come out in any order from the 21 cards. Then we have joining the Warsaw Pact. That was a yellow card. Obviously, this is a red card for the East. Then we have the Göttingen 18. There's that nuclear disarmament symbol there, the CND symbol. And then we have monetary reform in the West. Okay, so that's our marketplace of 7 cards. I'll just move this over a little bit like so. There we go. So that's our marketplace of 7 cards. The top one, as I said, just to reiterate, special card has to be played, if it's going to be played at all, before the end of the first decade. The other 7, anybody can play, but the person to go first is the person leading in prestige. And at the moment, the game always starts with the West leading in prestige, so the West can choose the first card. Now, I'll just put it up here again like I did in video number 1. When you choose a card, you can take any of 4 actions with that card. So we can choose a card to remove 1 unrest counter. We can choose a card to build up our economy. And that, by the way, we can choose any colour card, no matter which side of the fence we're on, west or east. We can choose any colour card, and we can use that number in the top left, and that would be the amount of build points we can use to build up our economy. Or we can increase our living standard. Again, we can choose any colour card and play a card and place, where applicable, up to 3 living standards in our provinces. Or we could pick a card and trigger the event, but that's when where the colours come in. For instance, red, the east, can only trigger the events, and the events are on this bottom half, look. This is going to remind many of you of Twilight Struggle, the way the cards can be used for these different actions. So the events are on the bottom half of the card. Only red, the east, can trigger red events, and only yellow, the west, can trigger yellow events. So it's the west's turn first. So west could choose one of its yellow cards to trigger an event. For instance, that would be a really good one as a starter for the West. Monetary reform in the West, 1948, because that would give the West 3 build points to build infrastructure, and that is connections or factories, 3 of them. And they could remove one of those blue unrest cubes. As opposed to if the West were using this card, or anybody were using this card just to build with, it would be 2 build points. So that's a good one for the West to start with, to trigger the event on that yellow card. But I can see an even better one, simply because I'll show you this, red. This is a card, a red card, which is really useful, being red, obviously, for the East player, the DDR. Because if the East wants to trigger the red event, it will put 2 build points, infrastructure builds, in Czechoslovakia, and the 2 in Poland. Now, these are special. So basically, for instance, the East could put 4 factories onto the map. However, we would also have to place 1 extra unrest cube in one of our provinces as a result of that. But also, we get to advance the East's prestige this way to the right by 1. So West knows that that's a really good card for the East. So West is going to play this card for the first card. Nasty. So let's see what West is going to do with this card. Now, obviously West can't use this card to play the events, and why would we want to? Because they're all red events anyway. So no, we can't do that. But we've still got 3 other actions that we could do with this red card. First of all, we could remove a piece of unrest. But there's a negative to that as well. It's inefficient just to remove 1 blue cube. But also, because we're using a red card to do that, we don't get it free. I'm afraid not. We'd have to remove a piece of infrastructure as well. So we're not going to do that. That's really quite inefficient, that first potential action. We could use it for 2 build points. There's the build points up there in the top left corner, as I said. So that would allow us to build 2 pieces of infrastructure. Or we could use it for to build up to 3 living standards. But our provinces aren't ready for any raise in living standards yet. We've only just started. Let's build up our economy by 2 build points. And I think the way for us to do that, there's many places we could put build points. Let's put a factory in Cassel with the 1 pointed up. Let's complete the connection between those two factories. And now that we've done that, a factory is worth its own points plus the number of connections it has. Its own points plus the number of connections moves it up to 2. Moves that one up to 2. And that's how you can see before your very eyes our economy quite simply building. So not a bad start for the West then, laying those 2 pieces of infrastructure. But the best part is that we've played mean and nasty and removed that red card from the market because we didn't want the East to get hold of it. We'll now put the card at the bottom of our board. It's just off camera at the moment, but we'll take a look at these later on. So now it's a choice of first turn for the East. Let's move these cards up. We've now got 6 in the marketplace, plus the East's special card. But the East needs to start building. We need to get something on that board. How can we start to build up our economy? I can't really see a lot on there, can you? By looking at the events, I mean. Can't use that one anyway for events. It's yellow. Same there. We could use this one for events to increase our prestige by 2. And to add 2 unrest in the West. There's this that would, oh dear. You see how that one would reduce our Western currency? Do you know, I think I'm going to go for build points. Okay, it is our first round after all. Got to build up our economy. I'm going to use this card here, the Göttingen 18. And I'm going to use it for those build points there. So we have 3 build points to use now for the East. So let's place another factory on the board. I'm going for Leipzig. Or should I go for Thüringen? Ooh, I think, actually, I'm going to go for Jena in Thüringen there. So that's one of our 3. For the second build point, I'm going to make a connection like so. Each factory is worth its own point plus the number of connections it has. So that bumps round to 2, as does that. And the current strength of the factory, current strength of your economy in that region, points upwards to the north. So we've laid 2 of our 3 build points. We now need to lay 1 more. Come on. Where shall I go? That's looking fairly obvious. Just find myself another factory. And we're going to go in Magdeburg. There. Okay, so we place it as a 1. It's worth its own number of points, which is 1 value. Doesn't yet have any connections. So that was a nice card to play. Could have played it for the events to lay unrest in the West. That's how these things work. And it is a red card, so I can use that event, and it would have increased our prestige. But just this early on, I wanted to get some building done on the map. And again, we'll place this card, discard it in the pile at the bottom of the map. So I think you can see now how it's moving quite quickly. Each have had 1 turn. Now we'll go into our second turn. I'm going to do the second turn with a little less explanation maybe. I don't know. But that's what we'll do. Last time, the West wanted to remove a card to stop the East using it. It's West's turn again. Not going to do that this time. This time they're choosing one of their own cards. It's that one we discussed before. Monetary reform in the West. That's a good card. Let's take a look. So we're going to use this card for its event. So we're not looking at that number anymore. We were going to play the event. So the first thing it's going to give us is 3 build points. So let's have a look at those. Where do we want our build points? Okay, I think we'll go Gießen, or Gießen, like so. We'll go Wolfsburg, like so. So that's 2 of our 3. We'll put a connection in. I think we will do that. There. Okay. Bumps that up to a 2 because it now has a connection. This one now goes to a 3. Okay. You see the economy building? We are cooking on gas. One more thing to do in West Germany, which means anywhere in West Germany, we can remove 1 protest. Okay, so let's remove 1 protest. Let's remove 1 protest. Well, this is building up quite nicely, this area. Don't want it to get too stroppy in the future. I'll remove 1 protest from that area. So that now only has 2 protests. By the way, if you haven't taken a look at the first video, which gave a good general overview of the game, the unrest cubes, I shouldn't call them protests, I should call them unrest cubes. The unrest cubes, we started most of the provinces anyway with 3 unrest cubes per province. If a 4th one goes on, that causes a mass protest. And if at the end of decade reckoning, if any west or east has 4 mass protest markers still on the board, the game ends. So we want to avoid that, which is why I just removed an unrest marker from there. I'll keep calling it protest, I know I will, but they are unrest cubes, but I'm sure you'll understand. So this one, which was West's go, now goes at the bottom of the board. That's good. Like that. Very good turn for the West. Back to the East again, and we're thinking, hey, come on. Actually, it is getting a little bit more difficult now. There's probably a really experienced player of this game out there now shouting at me to pick a certain card. Quite like land reform. I do quite like land reform. NATO membership and rearmament. No. Okay, I'm going to build again. I'm going to use that card. Let's move that one up. Land reform. Land reform, 1945 to 1948. Not too bad a card for the East, really. So we could use it for its build points. Don't forget. We could use it to remove 1 unrest. That's inefficient. We could use it to lay up to 3 living standards, but there's only 1 place on the board where I could put a living standard at the moment. So that's a bit premature. So we'll take the event. So what does the event give us? Well, the event gives us the opportunity to remove 2 unrest cubes. So let's do that first. I'm going to remove both of those cubes from East Berlin. Okay, so they're coming off the map. It's going to help stabilise East Berlin just a little. The next thing is, unfortunately, I'm going to have to move the Western currency track down by 1, but I can move the socialism track up by 1. So we move the Western currency down 1 and the socialism track up 1, like so. So next turn, and it's for the West. It's for the West. Don't forget the West can't use that one. That's the East's special card. Oh, crumbs, come on. Ah, okay. The West will use this one. Now, first thing you'll notice is it's red and yellow, so it's a dual card. So something a little bit different here. Now, we can use it for all the usual reasons, for all the usual purposes, the various actions. But I think West wants to use it for the events. Okay. Now, it will place, see that yellow icon there, one infrastructure build point in the West. It will also remove one, look at the cross on there, from the East. And the West, look, see that little Republican eagle? It's the West that'll choose where to remove that infrastructure. It will give the East one police power. And it would advance the cause of socialism by one. Stalinist purges, look. Whereas it's 52 to 53. And luckily the world saw the back of Joseph Stalin just after that point. But seeing as it's a dual card, the user of this card can either ignore one icon or ignore an arrow. We're going to ignore that arrow. So the East aren't even going to get that advance. I'll cover it up with my thumb, look, in socialism. So we're just going to do those icons that are left. Let's go. So by choosing a dual card, then we can ignore an icon, or we can ignore one of the arrows. We're going to ignore that one there. So no advancing socialism for the East. This is the West being quite nasty again. Okay, but what the West can do is lay another infrastructure. So where should we do that? It may be, I was going to say fairly obvious. We could build another connection. I'm thinking here. But instead, I think I'll place it here. Nordrhein-Westfalen. Okay, so that's our one build point. Plus I'm going to remove a build point, and it's the West's choice. Look, see the eagle? From the East. I think I'm going to remove the connection, because that has the most impact, because it turns that back down to 1 and that back down to 1. The West's playing a nasty game. Now, slightly different, okay, because there's a police action icon there, instead of going to the bottom of the map with the other discards, this now sits with the East player. And there'll be a reckoning of that come the end of decade reckoning. So for now, just be aware it's got a police icon on, and there it is repeated up there in the top right. It'll sit with the player for the East. Now it's the East's go once again. Do you know, I'm still not sure. We've been hit quite hard by the West just. So I think, let's go back. Remember those 2 cards that each player had in hand? Here they are, look. The difference is, when you're playing solo, don't look at them. Don't look at them. You don't know what's there. So you've got some surprise and randomness. And the way we're doing it is, you get 2 in your hand each decade. So each half decade, like in this half decade, you can use 1 card. And you turn it over, and that's your go, and you must action that card. Okay? So now we're going to do that. We're going to turn over our first hand card, and we must take an action with it. Oh! And I'm glad that's in my hand and not in the hand of the West. That's a great card for the West, for instance, because it has 4 build points. Or for the event, it has 3 build points, plus remove an unrest and place an unrest in West Germany. In East Germany, because of jealousies with this event. Because this is the Wirtschaftswunder, or some people, I've heard it called, I think, the miracle on the Rhine. So this is when the West German economy was really growing, it was really boosted, mainly by, well, the efforts of the German people themselves, of course, but also the encouragement and the agreements and the trade and the funds from the Western Allies. So that's the Wirtschaftswunder. But this is from the East's deck, so we're not going to do that. So instead, we could play it for 1 build point. That's no good. We can't play it for the event. We could play it to increase living standards, but looking at the East at the moment, there isn't a province where living standards is going to make much difference. Yes, there is. There's one thing we can do with this card. Watch. Okay, here's the card. We're going to use it to raise our living standards. But I think, do I do that or? I'm very tempted. Yes, I've said it, so we'll do it. For demonstration purposes, it's worth it. Although, in my mind, I've actually changed my mind. But we'll do it for the original thing that I said. We're going to raise living standards. So we'll take a living standard and we look for anywhere in our provinces where we've got at least 3 economy. There's nowhere. This one has 2, 1 there and 1 there. So we're going to place a living standard there. So we're going to increase the living standards in Sachsen-Anhalt by using 1, 2, and we can use this number 1 here on the card. We can lend that number to Sachsen-Anhalt. 1, 2, now 3. So once you've got 3, you can raise a living standard. So that's what we're doing. And the other hand card, I'll move back to the bottom. Okay, West's go. West is going to take this card, this yellow card, move that along, and play the action on that card. So the Reparations Agreement with Israel. First thing we have to do, this is 1952, by the way. First thing we have to do is one effect of that reparation agreement was to reduce the economic might of the West, because of course West Germany was paying reparations, and quite rightly so, to Israel. So one infrastructure will be dismantled. I'm thinking I'm going to take off one of the last ones we put on. I'm going to take off this one in Duisburg for now. The next is I have to put a unrest cube into one of my provinces. I reduced this one to 2, didn't I, before? So I'll just put it back up to 3. However, so those are the effects that the reparations agreement had within West Germany. But overall, to the outside world, it certainly increased West Germany's prestige. And you can see that reflected there on the card, where the prestige will move forward by 2. 2. And the final thing about this card is there's a red flight marker. Now that's a running person, a red flight marker there in the top right. The red flight markers will be reckoned with by East Germany at the end of decade reckoning. So it's the East's go now, and really the only choice we've got for the East, I mean the East could use this card but to no avail. I think that's going to be more useful in the second half decade. So we're going to use this card for the East. NATO membership and rearmament, 1955. It's a dual card, and we can add protest and we can increase the prestige of the West by another one to the left. But remember, for a dual card, we can ignore either an icon or an arrow. We're going to ignore the arrow, aren't we? So let's play that icon there now. And we're going to play that icon by adding one unrest cube to a West German province. And we're going to add it here. 4. There's now 4 cubes there, which means that the West now has to add a mass protest marker, because there's enough unrest in Hessen here, in this province, to cause mass protests on the streets. And there you go. There's the first of the mass protest markers in West Germany. Okay, so not a bad card. Now the thing is, that was the 7th card. There are no more cards in the market. Okay, so West Germany has lost its chance to play one of those 2 cards in its hand. So I'm going to take the top one off and discard it. Can't play it any longer. Missed its chance, because once the 7th card from the market is played, because we don't include the special card, once the 7th card of the market is played, the half decade is over. And now we enter the next half decade.